The first thing Clara Bennett noticed about her new neighbor was that he never looked toward her house. He worked from sunrise until the sky turned purple over the hills, repairing fences, carrying feed sacks, and riding across the open land in a faded blue work shirt with his hat pulled low. He was tall, quiet, and solitary, the kind of cowboy who seemed to belong to the wind and dust more than to any town or person. Clara had arrived in Willow Creek only a week earlier, bringing one worn trunk, a small wagon, and the ache of losing her husband 2 years before. Her late husband had been a kind man, but illness had taken him slowly, leaving Clara with grief that had settled into every corner of her life. She had sold their small home and moved west, because she could no longer bear the silence of the old place. The little cabin beside the community hall was all she could afford, but it had a garden patch, a wooden porch, and a view of the mountains. It felt like a place where she might begin again, if only she could remember how. On her third morning in Willow Creek, Clara baked an apple pie. Her mother had always said that a warm pie could introduce a person better than 100 nervous words. Clara used the last of her cinnamon, peeled the apples slowly, and pressed the crust into the tin with hands that trembled more than she wanted to admit. Then she wrapped the pie in a clean cloth and walked across the narrow field toward the neighboring ranch. The cowboy was repairing a fence when she reached him. He looked up at the sound of her boots in the grass, and Clara saw that his face was weathered but gentle. His eyes were grey-blue, tired in a way she understood. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Clara replied. "I'm Clara Bennett. I moved into the cabin next to the hall." The cowboy removed his hat politely. "Elias Turner." Clara held out the pie. "I thought I should introduce myself properly." Elias looked at the pie as though no one had ever handed him anything kind before. "You didn't have to do that." Clara smiled faintly. "I know, but I wanted to." He took it carefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Bennett." The title made Clara's smile fade. "Clara is fine." Elias nodded, then glanced toward his ranch house. "Would you like coffee?" Clara almost said no. She had learned that accepting invitations could lead to questions she did not want to answer. But something about Elias's quiet voice made her feel safe. His cabin was simple, with a fireplace, a rough wooden table, and old letters stacked in a neat pile beside a lamp. Clara noticed them immediately. She had spent the last year writing letters herself, though not to anyone in Willow Creek. After her husband died, she had answered an advertisement in a newspaper for a correspondence club meant for lonely people living far from town. The man who wrote to her had signed every letter with the name E.T. His letters had been thoughtful, kind, and unexpectedly comforting. He wrote about ranch work, lonely sunsets, the sound of rain on a cabin roof, and how grief could make a person feel invisible even in a crowded room. Clara had never told him her full name, and he had never asked. Yet every letter made her feel less alone. Elias poured coffee into 2 cups, and Clara sat at the table. As he reached for the sugar, his sleeve brushed the stack of letters. One slipped onto the floor. Clara bent to pick it up, but when she saw the handwriting, her breath caught. The letters E.T. had sent her were written in the same careful slant. Her hands began to shake. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Elias looked confused. It's one of my letters." Clara turned it over. Her name was not written on the envelope, only a post office box in the next county. But she knew. She knew the shape of the letters, the way the ink pressed darker at the end of each sentence, the small mark he always made beneath his signature. "You write to someone," she whispered. Elias's face changed. He looked toward the letters, then back at Clara. "Yes." "A widow?" Elias's gray, blue eyes widened. "How did you know?" Clara reached into her bag and pulled out one of her own letters, folded and worn from being read too many times. She placed it beside his stack. Elias stared at the handwriting. Then he looked at her as though the entire world had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. "Clara," he said, her eyes filled with tears. "Elias." For a long moment, neither moved. 2 strangers who had written to each other through lonely nights were sitting across the same table, separated only by the fear of what it might mean. "If this unexpected meeting has touched your heart," Please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional Wild West stories where hope finds its way home. Elias had written to Clara for almost a year, but he had never imagined he would meet her by accident, carrying an apple pie across a field. He had imagined her older, perhaps living in a distant town, perhaps someone he would never see beyond the paper in his hands. Yet there she was, sitting in his cabin in a green frontier dress, her long braid resting over one shoulder, her eyes full of the same quiet sadness he had felt in every letter she sent. Elias did not know what to say. He had always been better with words when there was distance between him and another person. On paper, he could admit that he missed having someone to speak to at the end of a hard day. On paper, he could tell Clara about the loneliness that had followed him since his fiancée died before their wedding. But now, with Clara only a few feet away, his heart felt too exposed. "I didn't know you lived next door," he finally said. Clara gave a small laugh through her tears. "Neither did I." Elias picked up one of her letters. "You wrote that you wanted a place where no one knew your sorrow." Clara looked toward the window. "I thought moving here would help." "Has it?" She looked at him. "It has now." The words warmed something in Elias that had been cold for years. But joy was quickly followed by fear. What if the letters had created a version of him that Clara liked more than the real man? What if she had expected someone more charming, more educated, more certain? Elias had spent too long believing he was only useful when he was working. He could mend a roof, break a horse, or survive a storm, but he did not know how to be loved. Clara seemed to sense his hesitation. "Your letters helped me," she said softly. "When my husband died, everyone told me time would heal me. But time did not heal anything by itself. It only made the house quieter." Elias nodded. "I know. Then your first letter came. You wrote that grief was not weakness. You wrote that surviving another day could be its own kind of courage." Elias lowered his eyes. "I meant it. I know you did." Clara reached across the table and touched his hand. It was a small touch, but Elias felt it all the way through him. For the next few weeks, they tried to become neighbors before becoming anything else. Elias helped Clara repair the leaking roof on her cabin. Clara brought him meals when he worked too late. They attended Sunday gatherings at the wooden community hall, where sunlight poured through tall windows and children ran between the benches. At first, people whispered about the widow and the quiet cowboy spending time together. But Clara no longer cared as much as she once would have. She had spent too long living according to other people's expectations. Elias was gentle with her. He never asked her to forget her husband. He never treated her grief like something inconvenient. Instead, he listened when she spoke about the past, and he told her stories about the woman he had once planned to marry. Their shared sorrow did not push them apart. It made them understand each other. One afternoon, Clara found Elias sitting alone in the community hall after everyone else had gone home. Letters were spread across the rustic table before him. "What are you doing?" she asked. Elias looked embarrassed, reading the first ones. Clara sat beside him. He handed her a letter she had written months earlier. In it, she had described a dream where she stood in a field full of wildflowers and could not remember why she had been sad. Elias had written beneath it, "Maybe happiness is not forgetting. Maybe it is remembering without being destroyed." Clara read the words again and felt tears rise. "You gave me hope," she said. Elias shook his head. "You gave it to me too." But that evening, a man from Clara's former town arrived at the hall. He was her late husband's brother, and he had come with an offer. He said Clara could return home, reclaim part of the family property, and live near people who knew her history. He spoke politely, but Clara heard the message beneath his words, "Leave this place before people begin to talk." Elias stood silently beside the door while the man spoke. Clara looked at him, hoping he would ask her to stay. But Elias only said, "You should do what makes you happy." Clara's heart sank. She had hoped he would fight for her even a little. Instead, he stepped back into silence, and she wondered if the letters had been easier for him than the truth of loving someone in real life. Clara spent the next 2 days packing her trunk, though every folded dress felt like a mistake. Her brother-in-law's offer was sensible. The old town held familiar streets, family connections, and the security of a home she already knew. But when she looked out her cabin window, she saw Elias repairing a gate in the distance, and her heart told her that safety was not the same as belonging. She had moved to Willow Creek because she wanted a new life, not a return to the old one. Still, Elias had not asked her to stay. He had not said that she mattered to him beyond the letters they shared. Perhaps he was afraid. Perhaps he did not love her. On the morning the stagecoach was due to arrive, Clara carried her trunk onto the porch. The sky was bright, and the mountains stood clear beyond the fields. She had just turned toward the road when she heard hoofbeats. Elias rode up quickly, his faded blue shirt dusty, his hair windblown beneath his hat. He climbed down and stood before her, holding a bundle of letters tied with twine. "I should have said something sooner," he began. Clara looked at him quietly. "You had time." Elias nodded. "I know. I was afraid." He placed the letters on the porch railing. "I spent years thinking that if I stayed alone, I could not lose anyone again. Then you came here with that pie, and suddenly every letter I wrote mattered in a different way." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Elias, please let me finish." His voice shook, but he continued. "I told you to do what makes you happy because I thought love meant letting you go if you wanted to go. But I never told you what I wanted. I want you here. I want you beside me at the community hall. I want to drink your coffee and eat your pie, and listen to you tell me about the flowers you want to plant. I want to write letters to you even when you are sitting in the next room." Clara's tears fell freely now. Elias took one letter from the bundle. "This was the first letter you sent me. You wrote that you were afraid your heart had already given everything it had to give." He looked at her. "Mine was too. But I was wrong. Hearts do not run out of love. They just need someone safe enough to trust again." Clara stepped closer. "And am I safe enough?" Elias reached for her hands. "You are home." The stagecoach appeared at the end of the road, but Clara did not move toward it. Her brother-in-law watched from the driver's seat, waiting. Clara looked once at the trunk, then back at Elias. "Tell him I won't be going," she said. Elias smiled, and it was the first full smile she had ever seen from him. Together, they carried her trunk back inside. In the months that followed, Clara and Elias turned their neighboring cabins into places filled with life. Elias built a small gate between the properties. Clara planted roses and wildflowers near the fence. They continued writing letters, even after they no longer needed the post office to deliver them. Sometimes Elias left a note beneath Clara's pie dish. Sometimes Clara tucked a letter into his coat pocket before he rode into town. They married the following spring in the warm wooden community hall where their letters had first been spread across the table. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows. The benches were filled with neighbors, and the table held the first pie Clara had baked after discovering Elias was the cowboy she had been writing to. As they stood together, Clara realized that love had not erased the people they had lost. It had simply taught them that grief and hope could live in the same heart. And when Elias held her hand, she knew that the words that had once traveled across miles of lonely land had finally brought them exactly where they were meant to be. If you enjoyed this heartfelt Wild West love story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional cowboy romances, second chances, and unforgettable stories of love finding its way through the hardest seasons.